This story is titled, My Girlfriend Packed Her Things and Left a Note Saying She's Pregnant with My Friend's Baby, who will raise the child, claiming she's not to blame because all men want her and it's my fault for investing in her beauty. So I silently canceled the wedding and started planning my revenge. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 29 years old. I need to get this story off my chest because at this point, the only one I trust anymore is my dog, Rex. I picked him up from the shelter right after my fiancé and my best friend gifted me a double betrayal wrapped in a pregnancy test. Rex is solid, loyal, no lies, no pretending, no side missions behind my back. Just tail wags and genuine companionship from someone who actually means it. But before I tell you how Rex became my shadow, let me walk you through how I systematically dismantled the lives of the two people who thought they could ruin mine and get away with it. I work at a logistics firm where I've been employed for about 9 years now. It's a good job with decent pay, but the hours can be absolutely brutal when things get busy. I'd been pulling doubles and extra shifts for months to save up for this wedding that my fiancée Victoria had been planning since we got engaged. She's 26, and she hasn't worked since the pandemic hit a few years back. She claimed she was focusing on healing and that getting a job would distract from her wedding vision. Whatever that meant, I loved her, so I busted my ass working 65-plus-hour weeks so she could have her dream venue and all the expensive details she wanted. We lived in this decent apartment complex, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom in a building that was constructed in the early 2000s. The place definitely had its issues that came with the age. The dishwasher made this weird grinding noise every time we ran it, like it was chewing up rocks. The neighbors above us apparently practiced salsa dancing at 3 a.m. because we'd hear constant shuffling and music at the most random hours. And whenever something broke, the maintenance guys took their sweet time fixing anything, no matter how many times you called. But despite all that, it was affordable and close to my work, which meant I could get home faster after those long shifts. Victoria had decorated the place with all this stuff from Target and IKEA to make it feel cozy and homey. She was actually pretty good at that kind of thing. I'll give her credit where it's due. She had an eye for making spaces feel warm and lived in, even if the bones of the apartment weren't perfect. Then summer rolled around, and not just any summer. We got hit with the worst freaking heat wave I can remember in years. Day after day of 105-plus degree weather with no relief in sight. The heat was relentless, oppressive, and it seemed like it would never break. Our AC unit was old, probably original to the building, and it had been making this concerning rattle for months whenever it kicked on. I kept meaning to call maintenance about it, but between working all those extra shifts and Victoria's constant wedding planning discussions, it kept slipping my mind. There was always something more urgent, or so it seemed. Until one day, it finally gave up the ghost completely. One minute it was pumping out lukewarm air that barely made a difference, and the next minute there was nothing. Just this sad little click, followed by complete silence. Our apartment turned into a literal oven within hours. The heat was so intense that sweat was actually dripping down the walls. Our plant started wilting immediately, and the chocolate bars we kept in the pantry straight up melted into brown puddles. Even opening all the windows didn't help because there wasn't a single breeze outside. Just hot, stagnant air that felt like breathing through a hairdryer. Victoria was absolutely miserable in that heat. She kept taking cold showers every few hours, and then laying on the kitchen floor afterward because the tiles were slightly cooler than anywhere else in the apartment. It was honestly pathetic to watch, but I wasn't doing much better. Coming home after a 13-hour shift in a warehouse with spotty air conditioning, only to walk into an apartment that was pushing 98 degrees inside, was pure torture. The heat was so oppressive that even sitting still, we were both drenched in sweat within minutes. I called maintenance immediately, but they were completely swamped with similar calls from all across the complex. Sorry, man. AC units are dropping like flies in this heat, the guy told me over the phone. We'll get to you as soon as we can, but we've got a waiting list longer than my arm. It wasn't exactly the news I wanted to hear, but I understood they were doing their best with an impossible situation. 3 days later, the HVAC technician finally showed up at our door. He took one look at our unit, shook his head, and delivered the verdict I was dreading. Yeah, your cooling coil is completely shot, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The part's going to take 6 to 8 days minimum to come in, maybe longer with all the demand right now. Amazing. Just absolutely perfect timing. That night, I was bitching about the whole situation to my buddy Brandon over text. I've known this guy since college. Always thought he was solid as a rock. We played intramural basketball together for 2 years, and he was my roommate during junior and senior year. He was the best man at my cousin's wedding, that kind of close relationship. He usually hosted our fantasy baseball drafts every spring, and we'd grab pizza and wings to watch games most Sundays during the season. It was the kind of friendship you don't question. Brandon had done really well for himself after graduation. He got into tech sales right out of college and had a natural talent for it. He married his college girlfriend Nicole pretty early on. She's a pediatric nurse and one of the sweetest people you could ever meet. Always bringing homemade brownies to gatherings and asking about everyone's families with genuine interest. They bought this nice house in the suburbs with a pool and everything. I always thought they had a solid marriage, the kind that made you believe in long-term relationships. But I guess you never really know people, right? So I'm texting Brandon about our AC nightmare, and he calls me right away instead of continuing to text. "Bro, you guys can crash at my place until it's fixed," he said without hesitation. "I've got central air, guest rooms all set up. Nicole's actually visiting her folks in Vermont for the week, some big family reunion thing her mom's been planning forever." Honestly, I wasn't feeling it at all. I hate imposing on people because it makes me feel like a mooch, and I've always been independent to a fault. Plus, Brandon and I were close, but we'd never been the type to stay at each other's houses for a week. That felt like crossing into territory we'd never explored before. "Thanks, man, but we can probably just get a cheap motel or something," I told him. "Dude, in this heat, every motel in the city is booked solid with people in the exact same situation," Brandon replied. "Trust me, I checked earlier just out of curiosity. The guest room is just sitting empty anyway. Nicole already made up the bed before she left because her sister was supposed to visit, but she canceled last minute. Everything's ready to go. You'd actually be doing me a favor by using it." I was still hesitant, but when I mentioned Brandon's offer to Victoria, she was immediately all over it. "Brandon's house? With the pool and that huge kitchen? Hell yes," she said, her eyes lighting up for the first time in days. "It'll be fun, like a little vacation. Plus, you can actually get some real sleep between your shifts instead of lying in a puddle of your own sweat all night." She had a valid point. I was already exhausted from all the overtime work, and the thought of trying to sleep in 95-plus-degree heat for an entire week wasn't exactly appealing. Plus, with the heat wave driving up demand, motel rates were absolutely through the roof. Some places were charging $200 plus per night for rooms that normally went for $60. So we packed some bags with clothes for about a week and headed over to Brandon's place. Brandon's place was genuinely nice. A 2-story house with a finished basement and central air that was blasting like heaven compared to our sweltering apartment. The relief of walking into that cool, comfortable environment was immediate and overwhelming. He gave us the full grand tour, showing us around like a proud homeowner. The guest room was set up perfectly with a king-size bed, an attached bathroom, and everything we could possibly need for a comfortable stay. "Mi casa es su casa," Brandon said with a grin, spreading his arms wide in a welcoming gesture. "Fridge is fully stocked. Help yourselves to anything you want. The Wi-Fi password is written on a sticky note on the fridge door. Stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." He seemed genuinely happy to have us there, and I was grateful for such a generous friend. Looking back now, I should have noticed how eager he was about the whole arrangement. There were signs that I completely missed, little things that should have raised red flags. The way he kept emphasizing that Nicole was gone for the entire week, like he was making sure we understood we'd have complete privacy. How he'd cleaned the entire house spotlessly before we arrived. I mean, the place was immaculate in a way that seemed almost obsessive. The brand new sheets on the guest bed that still had creases from the package. But I was too tired from work and too trusting of a friend I'd known for over a decade to think anything suspicious was going on. The first couple of days seemed normal enough, following a routine that felt comfortable and natural. I'd leave for work around 6 a.m. when it was still relatively cool outside, and I wouldn't get home until around 9 or 10 at night after those brutal shifts. When I'd walk through the door, exhausted and ready to collapse, Victoria and Brandon would usually be in the living room, watching some show on his massive smart TV or just chatting casually on the couch. Nothing seemed off about their interactions, just two people keeping each other company during the day. Brandon had been bringing home takeout for dinner most nights, which was incredibly thoughtful of him. Victoria was helping keep the place clean and organized as a way to contribute to the household, which I appreciated. It seemed like a decent arrangement that was working out well for everyone involved. Brandon had this huge smart TV in the living room with every streaming service known to mankind. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus, you name it. Victoria was absolutely in heaven because at our place we just had basic cable and a Hulu subscription. She kept talking enthusiastically about all the shows she was finally able to catch up on. Brandon showed me this awesome series on HBO that I've been wanting to watch forever, she'd tell me excitedly when I got home. Or Brandon and I started watching this fascinating documentary about serial killers. You'd probably love it. It was always Brandon this, Brandon that in her conversations, but I didn't think much of it at the time. They were stuck in the house together all day while I was at work, so of course they'd be watching TV together and developing shared interests. Victoria also seemed really enthusiastic about using Brandon's kitchen, which was much larger and better equipped than ours. She was never much of a cook at our place. We mostly survived on takeout or simple stuff like spaghetti with jar sauce and frozen garlic bread. But suddenly, she was experimenting with all these elaborate recipes and cooking techniques she'd never shown interest in before. Brandon showed me how to make his mom's famous meatloaf recipe, she'd tell me proudly, presenting this perfectly seasoned dish that looked like it came from a restaurant. He taught me the secret ingredient. It's a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce mixed with breadcrumbs. Again, I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just glad they were getting along so well and that she wasn't bored sitting around the house all day. If anything, I was relieved that my fiancé and my best friend were becoming closer friends themselves. It seemed like a positive development for everyone involved. By day 4, though, I started noticing something genuinely weird about Brandon's behavior. This dude used to hit the gym every single morning without fail. It was like a religious ritual for him. He played in a weekend basketball league, had golf outings with his work buddies, and always had social events or activities going on. He was constantly posting on Instagram from restaurants, bars, the golf course, hiking trails. The guy had an active social life that kept him busy. But now, suddenly, he was working from home every single day and never leaving the house, not even to grab the mail from the mailbox at the end of his driveway. I thought it was strange behavior, but I figured maybe he was just being an exceptionally good host or something. Maybe he didn't want to leave Victoria alone in his house all day while I was at work. That would make sense from a courtesy standpoint, right? It seemed like the kind of thoughtful gesture that a good friend would make. There were other things too. Small stuff that individually didn't mean much. But looking back, they formed a pattern I was too blind to see. The way Victoria would always be freshly showered when I got home from work, like she'd just stepped out of the bathroom minutes before I walked through the door. Her hair would still be damp, and she'd smell like that expensive body wash Brandon kept in the guest bathroom. How Brandon would sometimes be awkward around me in ways that didn't make sense. Overly friendly one minute, then distant and almost guilty-looking the next, like he was overcompensating for something. They had developed all these inside jokes after just a few days of hanging out together. Little references and shared laughs that I wasn't part of, which felt strange considering I'd known Brandon for over a decade and Victoria for 4 years. When I'd ask what was so funny, they'd wave it off as, "You had to be there," or something equally dismissive. I did notice that Victoria was dressing very differently at Brandon's house compared to how she dressed at home. At our apartment, she usually lounged around in old sweats and one of my oversized t-shirts, comfortable, practical clothes that were perfect for relaxing. But at Brandon's place, she was always put together in these little shorts and fitted tank tops that showed off her figure. When I mentioned it one evening, she just shrugged and said, "It's hot out." Yeah, it was hot outside, but Brandon's house was kept at a comfortable 70 degrees with the AC blasting constantly. There was no practical reason for her to be dressed like she was going to a beach party. By day 5, I was genuinely itching to get out of there, though I couldn't really explain why. I just had this low-key pressure in my chest, like we were overstaying our welcome or somehow throwing off the natural vibe of the house. Something was nagging at me to pack up and leave, even though logically, I knew we had nowhere else to go until our AC was fixed. I wasn't comfortable anymore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole situation. I called the HVAC company twice that day, practically begging them to move us up on their repair list. I told Victoria it was just me hating to impose on Brandon's hospitality for so long, but the truth was that my gut had already started whispering warnings that I wasn't ready to consciously acknowledge yet. Each time I called, they gave me the same response. "Still waiting on the supplier, sir. This heat wave's got everyone backed up with orders. We'll call you the minute the part comes in." Meanwhile, I was working those brutal double shifts with renewed purpose and determination. Victoria had her heart set on this specific reception venue that needed a $6,000 deposit to secure the booking. It was one of those converted warehouse spaces downtown with exposed brick walls and those trendy hanging Edison bulbs everywhere. Very Instagram-worthy, very expensive, and very much what she dreamed of for our special day. I was planning to surprise her with it as a gesture of my love and commitment to our future together. I had it all planned out in my head like a romantic movie scene. I would take her to dinner at this Greek restaurant she loved, where they had amazing lamb and this baklava she always raved about. During dessert, I'd tell her I'd secured the venue and show her the receipt as proof. I imagined how excited she'd be, how she'd probably cry happy tears and make a joyful scene right there in the restaurant. She'd probably post about it on social media with a million heart emojis, tagging me and talking about how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful fiancé. Finally, at the end of that long, miserable week, we got the call from the HVAC technician that our apartment was ready. The new cooling coil had been installed, the system had been recharged, and our AC was blasting beautiful cold air again. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming, not just because we could go home, but because I could escape this weird tension I'd been feeling at Brandon's house. We packed up our stuff, and as we were getting ready to leave, Victoria gave Brandon this incredibly long hug goodbye. It wasn't a quick, polite, thanks for the hospitality kind of hug. It was way too intimate and lingering for that. They held on to each other for what felt like an eternity, and I could see them whispering something to each other that I couldn't hear. The whole thing just felt completely inappropriate and off-putting. On the drive home, I couldn't shake what I'd witnessed, so I asked her straight up about it. What was that about? That hug was a bit much, don't you think? She laughed it off in that dismissive way people do when they're trying to make you feel crazy for noticing something obvious. He was just being nice, she said with a casual shrug. He let us stay there for a week when we had nowhere else to go. Don't be weird about it. I tried to let it go and move on. I really did. I even gave Brandon a limited edition watch I'd been holding on to, something meaningful and valuable, just to say thank you for his hospitality. I told him I genuinely appreciated the help during a difficult time, and I wanted him to have something special as a token of my gratitude. Anyway, life went back to what I thought was normal after we returned to our apartment. Or at least, what I convinced myself was normal at the time. Victoria seemed a bit distant and distracted, but I figured she was just coming down from a week of vacation vibes. You know how it feels when you have to readjust to regular life after staying somewhere nice. Going back to our regular apartment with its quirks and limitations after Brandon's perfect house with all the amenities probably felt like a bit of a letdown. She kept texting on her phone a lot throughout the day, but that wasn't particularly unusual behavior for her. Victoria was always on social media, always chatting with her girlfriends about wedding plans, always scrolling through Instagram or Pinterest looking for inspiration. Her phone was practically attached to her hand on a normal day, so I didn't think twice about the increased activity. Then she started taking a lot of shopping trips with her girlfriends, or at least that's what she told me they were. She'd leave in the morning saying she was going to hit the mall or browse some boutiques with her friends Sarah or Jessica, and she'd be gone for hours at a time. But when she came home, she'd have surprisingly few bags for someone who'd supposedly been out shopping for 6 or 7 hours straight. Maybe one small bag from Target or a coffee cup from Starbucks, but nothing that would justify being gone all day. Again, I didn't think too much about it at the time because I was still working my ass off with those overtime shifts. I was completely focused on finally getting that deposit money together for Victoria's dream venue. I'd finally saved up enough to make it happen, and I was planning to surprise her that upcoming weekend with the news. I had the whole romantic evening planned out perfectly in my mind. I'd made a reservation at Dimitri's, that Greek restaurant she loved, for Saturday night. I was going to dress up nice, bring her a beautiful bouquet of those pink roses she always admired at the grocery store, and give her the full romantic treatment she deserved. Then, during dessert, I'd give her an envelope containing the venue confirmation and the deposit receipt. It was going to be absolutely perfect, the kind of surprise that would make her cry happy tears and remind her why she fell in love with me in the first place. But then, one random Wednesday afternoon, everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down in the most brutal way possible. I was at work, unloading a delivery truck in the warehouse with my coworker Miguel. We were almost finished with the shipment, just a few more boxes to go, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I don't usually check my phone during shifts because our supervisor is pretty strict about staying focused on the job, but we were nearly done with the truck, and it could have been my boss with another urgent assignment. So I pulled out my phone to check the message, expecting maybe a work-related text or something routine. Instead, I saw a text from Victoria that made my blood run cold and my world completely collapse. 5 simple words that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I'm pregnant, it's not yours. I stared at my phone screen like it was malfunctioning or displaying some kind of error message. I read those words again and again, hoping they would somehow change or make sense in a different way. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing because it was so far outside the realm of what I thought was possible. This had to be some kind of mistake, some terrible misunderstanding. Miguel, who was working beside me, noticed something was seriously wrong with me. "You okay, man?" he asked with genuine concern in his voice. "You look like you just saw a ghost or something." I couldn't even speak. My throat felt completely closed up. I just showed him my phone screen with those devastating words still glowing on the display. "Damn," Miguel whispered after reading the message, his eyes widening with shock and sympathy. "Dude, you need to go home right now. Don't worry about finishing this. I'll cover for you and handle the rest of the truck." Miguel was a solid guy, the kind of coworker who had your back when life hit you with something devastating. I tried calling Victoria immediately, but it went straight to voicemail like she'd turned off her phone or was deliberately avoiding my calls. I texted back with shaking fingers. "What the hell does that mean?" Her response came back almost instantly, cold and matter-of-fact. "Come home, we need to talk." I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and needed to leave immediately. Miguel, being the stand-up guy he was, offered to finish my entire shift so I wouldn't get in trouble with management. I owe that man a beer someday. Hell, I owe him a whole case of beer for having my back during one of the worst moments of my life. The drive home was a complete blur of panic and disbelief. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire time, and I had to consciously focus on not running red lights or rear-ending someone. My mind was racing through every possible scenario, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who could it be? When did this happen? How long had this been going on behind my back? I kept having that stupid, naive thought that maybe there was some reasonable explanation for all of this. Maybe she was joking around with some kind of sick prank, though that would be completely out of character for her. Maybe there was some misunderstanding about the timing or the paternity. Deep down in my gut, though, I already knew the truth. It had to be Brandon. All those little weird moments and red flags during our stay at his house suddenly started making perfect, horrible sense. I walked into our apartment and immediately found Victoria sitting on our couch, already crying before I'd even said a single word. Her eyes were puffy and red from what looked like hours of sobbing. Mascara was running down her face into dark streaks, and she looked absolutely terrible, like someone who knew their world was about to end. The sight of her in that state should have made me feel sympathetic, but instead, it just confirmed that this nightmare was real. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whimpered through her tears, not even looking up at me when I walked in. "Marcus, you have to believe me. Brandon forced himself on me. I didn't know how to tell you because I was scared and confused." Then she hit me with the most ridiculous deflection I'd ever heard in my life. "You're the one who brought us there. You saw how guys are around me. They get weird, obsessive, and weak. You knew your friend always had a thing for me, and you saw it happening. You brought me into his house and left me there all day, every day. What did you expect to happen?" That was the exact moment when everything clicked into place for me. She wasn't confessing to cheating and asking for forgiveness. She wasn't taking responsibility for betraying our relationship and breaking my trust. Instead, she was actually trying to blame me for her affair. She was making it my fault that she got pregnant by my best friend in his house while I was working double shifts to pay for our wedding. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. And you know what the most infuriating part was? I had never once seen Brandon show any romantic interest in Victoria. He was literally married to a wonderful woman who he seemed to genuinely love. This whole "he always had a thing for me" narrative was complete bullshit that she was making up on the spot to justify her actions. "You seriously think that's a valid excuse?" I said, my voice deadly calm in a way that surprised even me. "That you're just so stunning, so dangerously irresistible that any man within a 200-foot radius just turns into a drooling caveman who can't control himself? What are you, Scarlett Johansson? Please." Her eyes didn't even flinch when I said that. She genuinely believed every word of her ridiculous justification. "You basically set me up," she continued, like I had handed her a loaded gun and dared her to pull the trigger. "You knew how he looked at me during social gatherings. You just didn't want to admit it to yourself because it made you uncomfortable." I let out the smallest laugh, cold, sharp, and completely devoid of humor. Right. So being faithful to your fiancé wasn't your responsibility, it was mine. Got it. I should have scheduled your loyalty appointments between my double shifts, right? Maybe set up a chastity belt reminder on my phone? I stared at her for a long moment, letting the full weight of her betrayal sink in completely. Then I asked the question I needed answered, even though I dreaded hearing the response. When did it happen? Because at this point, I don't need another bullshit excuse. I need the timeline. I need to know how far back this rot goes, and how long I've been sleeping next to a complete stranger. It happened the second day we were there, she said, still crying but with less conviction than before. You were at work pulling one of your long shifts. He just came on to me so strong, and I was scared to reject him because we were staying in his house. I didn't know what he might do if I said no. But something about her story wasn't adding up mathematically, and my brain started doing the calculations. If she was already confirming a pregnancy now, and it happened on the second day we were at Brandon's house, the timing was completely wrong. It takes at least a couple of weeks after conception to get a positive pregnancy test, and we'd only been back from Brandon's house for about 12 days total. So you're telling me you knew you were pregnant back when we were still at Brandon's house, and you didn't tell me then? I asked, watching her face carefully for signs of the lie I knew was coming. She stuttered and stumbled over her words. I wasn't sure then. I mean, I had some suspicions, but I just took the test today to confirm it. Complete bullshit. Absolute, transparent bullshit, and we both knew it. I didn't say anything immediately after she delivered that obvious lie. I just stared at her, watching her squirm uncomfortably under my gaze, watching her pathetic story fall apart in real time. The silence stretched between us, heavy and loaded with the weight of her deception. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want a straight answer, I said, my voice remaining scarily calm even to my own ears. Is Brandon the only one you've been sleeping with behind my back? Her eyes widened with what looked like genuine shock at the question. What? Yes, of course. It was just that one time, I swear to you. I would never... But even as she said it, I could tell there were more lies lurking beneath the surface. I could feel it in my gut. That intuition that tells you when someone is still holding back crucial information. More lies. I was certain of it. But honestly, did it even matter at that point, whether it was one time or 10 times? She had slept with my best friend and was now pregnant with his child, all while trying to manipulate me into believing it was somehow my fault. The specific details seemed almost irrelevant compared to the magnitude of the betrayal. You keep saying he forced himself on you, I continued, pressing her on the inconsistencies in her story. That's a very serious accusation, Victoria. Sexual assault is a crime. Are you telling me that's what happened? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to catch the doubt in her eyes before she answered. Well, he was really aggressive about it, and I didn't want to upset him since we were staying in his house as guests. I felt like I didn't have a choice in the situation. Notice how her story was already changing and evolving. First, it was that he forced himself on her, which implies assault. Now it was that he was aggressive and she didn't want to upset him. Those are two completely different scenarios, and the fact that she was already walking back her initial claim told me everything I needed to know about the truth. So you're telling me that my friend of over 12 years, a guy who's never had so much as a parking ticket in his entire adult life, sexually assaulted you in his own home? I asked, my voice dripping with skepticism. And your response to this alleged assault was to continue staying in his house for the rest of the week? To watch TV with him every night like nothing happened? To cook meals with him and laugh at his jokes? To develop inside jokes and act like you were best friends? She buried her face in her hands, unable to meet my eyes anymore. You don't understand, Marcus. It's complicated. The situation was more complex than you're making it sound. No, it's actually very simple, I replied coldly. You're lying to me right now, just like you've been lying to me for weeks. You weren't assaulted by Brandon. You had an affair with him, and now you're pregnant with his child. And instead of taking responsibility for your actions, you're trying to make it my fault somehow for trusting my friend and putting you in a situation where you chose to betray me. She started sobbing even harder at that point, her whole body shaking with the force of her tears. That's not true. I love you, Marcus. Why would I throw everything we have away for Brandon? Why would I destroy our relationship and our future together for some meaningless fling? That's exactly what I'd like to know, I said. That's the question you should be asking yourself. She kept sobbing uncontrollably, but I was done listening to her tears and her excuses. I didn't yell at her or throw things around the apartment like some kind of unhinged maniac. I just walked out of our apartment with my keys in my hand and sat in my car in the parking lot for about 3 hours, trying to process what had just happened to my life. Then, with a clarity that surprised me, I started making phone calls. I began systematically canceling everything we had planned for our wedding. Every vendor, every service, every detail that Victoria had spent months planning. I was going to undo it all. The deposits were going to be lost, but frankly, that money was gone either way. At least this way, I wouldn't have to see those services being used for a wedding that was built on lies and betrayal. First, I called the venue, that expensive converted warehouse space that Victoria had her heart set on. "I'm sorry to inform you that we won't be needing the space after all," I told the coordinator who answered the phone. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, sir," she replied, with genuine sympathy in her voice. "May I ask the reason for the cancellation? Sometimes we can work with couples to reschedule if there are extenuating circumstances." "Change of plans," I said simply. It was the understatement of the century, but I wasn't about to explain the whole sordid story to a stranger. Then I called the caterer, followed by the photographer, the DJ, and the florist. One by one, I systematically undid all the plans we'd made together, all the dreams we'd built for our future. Some of them had significant cancellation fees that would cost me hundreds or even thousands of dollars. But I didn't care anymore. The money was already gone. At least this way, I could control how it disappeared. The whole time I was making these cancellation calls, Victoria was absolutely blowing up my phone with texts and calls. My phone was buzzing constantly with her desperate attempts to reach me, but I ignored every single one of them. I turned my phone to silent mode and kept methodically going down my list of wedding vendors, crossing each one off as I canceled their services. When I finally went back inside our apartment several hours later, Victoria was still sitting on the couch in almost the exact same position where I'd left her. It was like she hadn't moved a muscle the entire time I was gone. Her makeup was completely ruined by now. Black streaks of mascara had dried on her face in crusty lines, and her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. She looked absolutely terrible. When she saw me walk through the door, she looked up at me with this weird, hopeful expression on her face. Like maybe during my time away, I'd somehow forgiven her for everything. Like maybe I decided that I was willing to raise my friend's kid and pretend that everything was fine. Like maybe we could just sweep this whole mess under the rug and move forward with our lives as if nothing had happened. "I'm going to stay at a motel tonight," I announced matter-of-factly. "You should figure out where you're going to live, because this arrangement isn't going to work anymore." "What?" she gasped, her hopeful expression immediately crashing into panic and desperation. "You're kicking me out? Marcus, please, we can work through this together. People get past infidelity all the time. We can go to counseling, we can rebuild our trust. Don't throw away everything we have over one mistake." "There's no we anymore," I replied coldly. "There's you, there's your baby, and there's Brandon. Figure out how that's going to work because I'm completely out of the equation now." "But I love you!" she wailed, her voice breaking with desperation. "It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake that I regret more than anything in my life. Brandon took advantage of me when I was vulnerable and stuck in his house. Please don't abandon me when I need you most." I just looked at her with complete detachment, feeling nothing but cold indifference. "Pack your stuff. I want you gone by this weekend. That gives you 3 days to figure out your next move." "You can't do this to me," she protested, her desperation turning into indignation. "We're engaged to be married. This is my home too. I have rights here, and you can't just throw me out on the street like garbage." "Actually, I can," I corrected her calmly. "Your name isn't on the lease agreement. You don't pay rent or contribute to any of the household expenses. You're essentially a guest here, and I'm telling you that it's time to leave. Legally speaking, you have no rights to this apartment whatsoever." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice becoming increasingly panicked. "I don't have any money saved up. I don't have a job. I have no way to support myself, especially now that I'm pregnant." And whose fault was that exactly? She'd been perfectly capable of working for the past 3 years, but she'd chosen not to pursue employment because she wanted to focus on healing and wedding planning. Now that decision was coming back to bite her, and somehow that was supposed to be my problem to solve. "I suggest you call your parents or one of your close friends," I said with a shrug. "Or hey, maybe Brandon will take you in permanently. He seems to really enjoy having you around his house. Maybe you two can figure out some kind of living arrangement that works for everyone involved." She started crying even harder at that suggestion, her whole body shaking with the force of her sobs. "You're being so cruel right now. This isn't like you at all, Marcus. You're usually so understanding and compassionate. I know you're hurt and angry, but this vindictive side of you is scaring me." "You're absolutely right," I acknowledged. "This isn't like me at all. But finding out that my fiancé cheated on me with my best friend and is now pregnant with his child isn't like you either. Or at least, I didn't think it was. Guess we were both wrong about who we really are underneath it all." I grabbed some clothes, my laptop, and my toiletries, stuffing everything into a duffel bag. As I headed for the door, I turned back to give her one final warning. "Don't even think about changing the locks while I'm gone. I'll be back tomorrow to check on things and make sure you're making progress on packing." "So that's it?" she sobbed, her voice thick with tears and disbelief. "You're just throwing away 4 years of our relationship over one mistake? 4 years of love and memories and plans for the future, and you're willing to toss it all away?" I stopped at the door and turned back to look at her one last time. "Hell yeah, I am." Then I left and didn't look back. I spent that night in a Holiday Inn that smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale cigarettes, even though it was supposedly a non-smoking room. The bed was uncomfortable. The air conditioning unit rattled loudly every time it cycled on, and I couldn't sleep much at all. I kept replaying everything that had happened in my head, looking for signs I might have missed along the way. Now that I knew what to look for, there were plenty of red flags that I'd been too blind or too trusting to see at the time. The way Victoria was always freshly showered when I got home from work. That wasn't because she was hot from the summer weather. The inside jokes and whispered conversations in the kitchen that stopped whenever I walked into the room. The way Brandon suddenly became a complete homebody who never left his house while we were staying there. All of it pointed to one obvious conclusion, and I'd been too naive to connect the dots until it was too late. The next day, after a terrible night of tossing and turning in that cheap motel bed, I decided it was time to confront Brandon directly. I wasn't going to let him think he could just get away with this betrayal without facing any consequences. I caught him coming out of his house as I was waiting in my car across the street, watching for him to make an appearance. I walked right up to him with a calm demeanor that surprised even me, considering how much rage I was feeling underneath the surface. "Victoria's pregnant," I announced without any preamble. "She says it's yours. Congratulations on your upcoming fatherhood." His face did this weird thing when I said that. It wasn't shock or surprise like you'd expect from someone being falsely accused. It wasn't shame or guilt like you'd expect from someone who'd been caught in a terrible act. It was just annoyance, like I'd interrupted his perfectly normal day with some trivial bullshit that wasn't worth his time. "You needed a place to stay, and I let you crash at my house for a week out of the goodness of my heart," he said with an incredulous tone. "And now you're throwing these wild accusations at me? Seriously, Marcus? This is how you repay my hospitality?" There was zero shame in his voice, zero acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He was acting like I was the unreasonable one for bringing this up. "Did you force yourself on her?" I asked, already knowing the answer deep down, but needing to hear him say it. He scoffed dismissively, like the very question was ridiculous. "Is that what she told you happened? Man, you should ask yourself why she'd make up such crazy, dramatic shit. Maybe she's trying to cover up something else entirely. So you're denying that you slept with her?" I pressed, wanting to hear him lie to my face. For the first time in our conversation, Brandon seemed genuinely at a loss for words. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then looked around nervously like he was trying to figure out his next move. "Look, she came on to me, all right? What was I supposed to do in that situation? I'm only human." "I don't know, Brandon," I replied sarcastically. "Maybe not fuck your best friend's fiancé? Maybe that would have been the appropriate response. Just a thought." "It wasn't like that, and you know it," he said, getting defensive now. "We were just hanging out one evening, watching a movie on the couch. She was wearing those little shorts she always wears around the house, sitting really close to me, being flirty and touchy. One thing led to another. It's not like I planned for it to happen. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting every instinct I had to punch him square in his stupid, lying face. One thing led to another? That's your excuse? You don't accidentally fall into your best friend's fiancé, Brandon. That requires deliberate choices and actions. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, suddenly looking around nervously at his neighbors' houses. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? It was a mistake, a huge mistake that I regret. But she's making it sound like I'm some kind of predator or rapist, and that's complete bullshit. She was all over me the entire week you guys stayed here. The entire week, huh? I caught that slip immediately. Not just one time like she claimed to me? Brandon's eyes widened slightly as he realized he'd said too much and revealed information that contradicted Victoria's story. I just meant, the flirting and sexual tension and stuff like that. The actual incident was just that one time. Save it, I said, disgusted by his pathetic attempts to backtrack. You're dead to me. We're done. Forever. Don't ever contact me again. I walked away before I did something that would land me in jail for assault. The temptation to beat the shit out of him was almost overwhelming, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything and would only make my situation worse. I went home and started the methodical process of packing Victoria's belongings into boxes. I gathered all her clothes, her makeup and beauty products, her books and magazines, her little decorative pillows and scented candles, and all the other miscellaneous crap that had accumulated over the years. I wasn't rough with her things. I didn't break anything or throw stuff around in a fit of rage. I just systematically and efficiently packed everything that belonged to her and stacked the boxes by the front door. When I was finished, I sent her a simple, direct text message. Your belongings will be on the porch Saturday morning. You have 2 hours to pick them up after that, or I'm donating everything to Goodwill. The response from Victoria was immediate and came in multiple waves of desperation. First came the begging phase. Please don't do this to me. I love you more than anything in this world. We can work through this together if you just give us a chance. Don't throw away everything we've built over one terrible mistake. Then came the blame-shifting phase. This is so unfair. You're punishing me for one mistake when Brandon is equally responsible for what happened. Why am I the only one losing everything? He's the one who seduced me when I was vulnerable and stuck in his house. Next was the threatening phase. I'll call the police if you put my stuff outside like that. You can't just throw me out of my home. There are laws against illegal eviction. I have tenant rights, and what you're doing is probably criminal. Finally, she cycled back to playing the victim. I have nowhere to go and no money to support myself. What am I supposed to do? How can you be so heartless when I'm pregnant and vulnerable? This isn't the man I fell in love with. I blocked her number after reading that pathetic cycle of manipulation and continued with my packing process. When Saturday morning arrived, I put all her boxes on the front porch as promised, then immediately left for a coffee shop down the street. I didn't want to see her face again, and I definitely didn't want to endure another round of tears, accusations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. When I returned to the apartment a few hours later, all the boxes were gone. She'd managed to collect everything without us having to interact face to face, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. She had left her key to the apartment in the mailbox. At least she had that much decency left in her. That night, I changed the locks anyway, just to be absolutely safe. I wasn't taking any chances on her trying to sneak back in later. After I finished securing the apartment, I threw myself onto the couch with all the lights off and no TV playing. Just complete silence. And it hit me harder than I'd expected it would. The finality of it all was overwhelming. It didn't feel like justice or victory like I'd thought it might. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of wreckage that I hadn't caused, wondering where to even begin picking up the pieces of my shattered life. I kept replaying everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Every glance between them that I'd dismissed, every inside joke I'd ignored, that inappropriately long goodbye hug that had made me uncomfortable. My head was spinning with questions that I'd probably never get real answers to. How did I miss all the signs? How long had this affair actually been going on? Were there other times before we stayed at Brandon's house? And yeah, I started blaming myself for some of it. Maybe if I hadn't accepted Brandon's offer to stay at his place, none of this would have happened. Maybe if I just toughed it out in our overheated apartment for that week, my relationship would still be intact. Maybe if I'd been more attentive to the warning signs, I could have prevented this disaster from happening. Then, exactly 1 week later, I got a phone call that changed everything and confirmed my worst suspicions. It was from Nicole, Brandon's wife. I hadn't talked to her since before this whole mess started, and hearing her voice on the phone immediately filled me with dread. I found the messages, she said, her voice completely flat and emotionless. Screenshots, pictures, explicit texts, everything. She wasn't forced into anything, Marcus. It was completely mutual from the very beginning. They've been texting each other constantly since the 4th day you guys stayed at our house. My stomach dropped, not because I was surprised by this revelation, but because having my suspicions confirmed still hurt like a physical slap to the face. Even when you know the truth in your gut, hearing it spoken out loud by someone else makes it undeniably real. Nicole kept talking, her voice hollow and defeated. They were actively planning secret meetups for times when you'd be at work, and I'd be out of town. She was sending him explicit pictures from your bathroom while you were sleeping in the guest room just down the hall. I have screenshots of everything. The planning, the flirting, the aftermath where they talked about how good it was. I felt physically sick when she said that. I actually had to sit down because my legs felt weak. The thought of Victoria sneaking around Brandon's house, taking nude photos to send him while I was exhausted and asleep from working overtime to pay for our wedding. It was beyond disgusting. When did the actual physical affair start? I asked, though I dreaded hearing the answer. From what I can piece together from reading through all their text conversations, it started the second night you were there. Nicole replied with that same hollow tone. After you fell asleep on the couch from exhaustion. Brandon carried you to the guest room and then, yeah, they had sex in our marital bed while you were passed out in the next room. So while I was unconscious from working myself to the bone, my fiancé was fucking my best friend in his house. They were probably giggling about how deeply I was sleeping, how oblivious I was to what was happening right under my nose. How did you find out about all this? I asked Nicole, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Brandon's been acting completely weird ever since you guys stayed at our house, she explained. Distant, constantly checking his phone, being secretive about everything. I had a gut feeling that something was wrong, so I checked his iPad one night while he was in the shower. All his text messages sync automatically to it, and that's where I found everything. Months worth of conversations between him and Victoria. I'm so sorry this happened to you too, Nicole, I said, meaning every word. You got screwed over in this situation just as much as I did. You didn't deserve any of this. Thanks, she replied with a bitter laugh. I'm filing for divorce next week. I might even sue him for marital misconduct, depending on what my lawyer says about our options. I just thought you should know the complete truth about what really happened, since I'm sure Victoria fed you a bunch of lies about being forced or coerced. I thanked Nicole for calling me and being honest about everything, then hung up the phone. That night, something fundamental changed inside me. The numbness and shock that I'd been feeling for the past week wore off completely, and this cold, calculating anger took its place. They had systematically destroyed my life, my ability to trust people, and my plans for the future. And for what? A few cheap thrills and some exciting forbidden sex? Well, they were going to pay for what they'd done. Both of them were going to face serious consequences for their actions. I wasn't going to just quietly fade away and let them get on with their lives like nothing had happened. If they wanted to play games and destroy people's lives, then I was going to show them how that game really worked. I started with information gathering, and Nicole turned out to be an absolute goldmine of useful intelligence. She was hurt, angry, and more than willing to help me expose Brandon's shitty behavior to the world. She forwarded me all the screenshots of their text conversations, the explicit pictures Victoria had sent him, and everything else she'd discovered on his devices. It was disgusting and painful to look at, but it was necessary evidence for what I had planned. The text conversations were incredibly eye-opening, and not just because of the explicit sexual content. What really got to me was the casual way they talked about deceiving me and Nicole. They had inside jokes about how completely oblivious I was to what was happening. Victoria complained constantly about me working too much and being tired all the time, while simultaneously spending the money I was earning from those extra shifts. Brandon promised to take care of her financially once they figured out how to break the news to me and Nicole about their relationship. The most infuriating part was that they had actually been plotting to tell us the truth after our wedding. Their plan was to let me pay for this huge, expensive celebration of our love, and then drop the bomb that she was leaving me for Brandon. The unexpected pregnancy had just accelerated their timeline and forced their hand earlier than they'd intended. Brandon worked at this trendy tech startup, one of those fancy companies with an open office layout, ping-pong tables, and a reputation for having a strong corporate culture. They were very image-conscious and prided themselves on hiring people with good character and strong moral values. I had met his boss at a company holiday party once, a nice family man with conservative values who took the company's reputation very seriously. I set up a new anonymous email address and carefully composed a professional message to Brandon's supervisor. I attached select screenshots of Brandon's text conversations with Victoria, specifically choosing messages where he was bragging about cheating on his wife with his best friend's fiancée. I made sure to only include messages that had been sent during work hours, clearly showing that he was working from home, but actually spending company time planning hookups and engaging in personal drama. I believe your company's stated values would not align with this kind of behavior from one of your employees, I wrote in the email. I thought you should be aware of the character and integrity of the man who is representing your organization to clients and partners. I hit send and felt a surge of satisfaction. That was phase 1 of my revenge plan. Phase 2 was more direct and personal. Thanks to Nicole's detective work, I knew that Brandon had been hiding money from her throughout their marriage. He had a secret bank account that she didn't know about, which he was planning to use to buy a vintage Mustang without telling her. It was the kind of shady financial behavior that would look absolutely terrible in divorce proceedings, especially when combined with his infidelity. Nicole's divorce lawyer was extremely interested in this information when I connected them and provided everything I knew about Brandon's hidden assets. That secret account suddenly became Exhibit A in their divorce case, and Brandon was going to have a much harder time hiding his assets from the court. For Victoria, my approach was going to be different. I didn't necessarily want to completely destroy her life. She was doing a pretty good job of that herself, but I did want her permanently gone from my life, and there was one loose end I needed to tie up first: our shared friend group. I knew Victoria well enough to know that she'd be spinning some elaborate bullshit story about why our wedding had been canceled. She'd probably be painting herself as the victim, telling people that I had kicked her out when she was vulnerable and pregnant, that I had abandoned her in her time of greatest need. I couldn't let that false narrative stand unchallenged, so I decided to get ahead of her damage control efforts. I created a private group chat with our 7 closest mutual friends, people who had known both of us for years and would be hearing Victoria's version of events sooner or later. Hey guys, I know Victoria has probably reached out to some of you already about our breakup, I wrote in the group message. Before you hear only her side of the story, I thought you should know what actually happened. Then I laid out all the facts in a clear, straightforward manner. I included the timeline of events, the pregnancy announcement, the lies about being forced, and most importantly, the truth that Nicole had discovered through Brandon's text messages. I didn't ask them to pick sides or make any dramatic demands about their loyalty. I didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself, and these were intelligent people who could draw their own conclusions about what had really happened. Within just a few days, I started hearing through the grapevine that Victoria was complaining bitterly about how everyone had abandoned her in her time of need. Good. Actions have consequences, and she was finally starting to face some of them. But I wasn't done with Brandon yet, not by a long shot. He had betrayed a friendship that went back over a decade, and he deserved much more than just a divorce and some workplace drama. 2 weeks after I sent that anonymous email to Brandon's boss, Nicole called me with an update that brought a smile to my face. Brandon got put on probation at work, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Something about conduct unbecoming of company values and misuse of work-from-home privileges. He's freaking out completely and thinks I had something to do with it. I pretended to be surprised by this news. Really? That's interesting timing. What kind of probation are we talking about? He can't work from home anymore, Nicole explained. He has to be in the office from 9 to 5 every day, closely monitored by his supervisor. His side hustle, that drop-shipping business he was running during work hours, is now impossible to maintain. I heard his income took a serious hit. Meanwhile, Victoria's carefully laid plans had backfired spectacularly on her. It turned out that Brandon wanted absolutely nothing to do with her or the baby now that their affair had been exposed. He wouldn't return her calls, had blocked her on every social media platform, and was completely ignoring her attempts to contact him. Apparently, he wasn't as interested in playing daddy and taking responsibility for his actions as he had claimed in those romantic text messages. I found out through our mutual friend group that Victoria was now frantically backpedaling on her story. She was telling people that maybe the baby was actually mine after all, and she was desperately trying to get back in touch with me. She had burned her bridges with Brandon, and now she was realizing that she had nowhere else to turn. Too little, too late. But Brandon's problems were just beginning, and I wasn't satisfied with just a work probation and a messy divorce. This guy had been my friend for years. I had trusted him completely, and he had fucked my fiancée in his house while I was working overtime to pay for a wedding that would never happen. He deserved more consequences than what he'd faced so far, so I decided to go nuclear on his future prospects. Brandon had always talked about his dream of opening his own business someday. For years, he'd been developing this concept for a sports bar with a unique twist. All the tables would have built-in beer taps where customers could pour their own drinks and get charged by the ounce. He'd even managed to secure some preliminary investors and was actively looking for the right location to make his dream a reality. Here's where it gets interesting. One of those investors happened to be my cousin's husband, who I'd met at several family gatherings over the years. Small world, right? So I made sure that my cousin's husband got an anonymous email with all the sordid details of Brandon's character and behavior. I included information about how he had cheated on his wife with his best friend's fiancée, how he had lied and manipulated people who trusted him, and how fundamentally untrustworthy he was as a person. Would you really want to go into business with someone like this? The email concluded. Can you trust someone who would betray his closest friends and his own wife? What does this say about his character and integrity as a potential business partner? The entire investment group pulled out within a week of receiving that information. Brandon's dream business was dead in the water, and his plans for financial independence had evaporated completely. His vision of being a successful entrepreneur had been crushed, and he had no one to blame but himself. Throughout all of this systematic destruction, I maintained complete radio silence with both Brandon and Victoria. I had blocked them everywhere. Phone, social media, email, everything. I was focused entirely on rebuilding my own life and moving forward, rather than getting dragged into any more drama or manipulation attempts. I started hitting the gym regularly for the first time in years, which helped me channel my anger into something productive. I also made the decision to adopt a rescue dog from the local animal shelter, a big, goofy Labrador mix named Rex, who quickly became my best buddy and most loyal companion. Rex was everything that Brandon and Victoria weren't: loyal, affectionate, honest, and incapable of betrayal. He was always genuinely happy to see me when I got home from work, never judging me, never lying to me, never sneaking around behind my back. Just pure, simple companionship from someone who actually meant it. Nicole would call me occasionally with updates about the ongoing divorce proceedings, like we were part of some kind of survivors support group. She's couch surfing at her friend Amber's place now, Nicole told me during one of these calls. Working part-time at some vape shop downtown. She tried to get child support proceedings started, but Brandon demanded a paternity test first. I mostly just listened to Nicole's updates with a sense of detachment, feeling like I was hearing about characters in some soap opera rather than people who had once been central figures in my life. The whole situation felt surreal and distant now that I was focusing on moving forward. Brandon had to move into a studio apartment, Nicole told me during another one of our check-in calls. He's telling everyone that I screwed him over in the divorce, playing the victim card to anyone who will listen. Meanwhile, he can't even get a date because word has gotten around in our social circle about what he did to you and me. I wasn't surprised by any of this. Our social circle wasn't huge, and news travels fast when someone does something as spectacularly shitty as what Brandon had pulled. Actions have consequences, and he was learning that lesson the hard way. Eventually, I started distancing myself from Nicole's updates as well. While her information had been initially satisfying in a vindictive way, these regular reports were keeping me emotionally tethered to a past that I desperately wanted to forget completely. I needed a clean break from all of it. The drama, the revenge, the constant reminders of how I'd been betrayed. Nicole's divorce was proceeding. Brandon was getting what he deserved, and Victoria was facing the natural consequences of her actions. My work was essentially done. The money I'd been saving for our wedding, that substantial nest egg I'd built up through months of overtime and sacrifice, I put to much better use. I used it to pay off my car completely, eliminating that monthly payment from my budget. I also upgraded the HVAC system in my apartment with top-of-the-line equipment, which was ironically appropriate given how this whole mess had started with a broken air conditioner. And I booked a solo trip to Norway, something I'd always wanted to do. I'd always dreamed of seeing the Northern Lights, and I figured I deserved a real vacation after dealing with all this shit. Rex the dog turned out to be the best decision I'd made in years, possibly the best thing to come out of this entire nightmare. He was loyal, affectionate, and always genuinely excited to see me when I got home from work. There was no judgment from him, no lies, no sneaking around or hidden agendas. Just pure, honest companionship from a living being who actually gave a damn about me. We started going on these long hiking adventures together on weekends, exploring new trails in the mountains, and camping out under the stars. It was exactly the kind of outdoor activity I'd always wanted to do, but Victoria had never been interested in. Too many bugs, she used to complain. Not enough bathrooms. What if it rains? What if we get lost? Rex, on the other hand, was up for any adventure and never complained about anything. About 4 months after everything had blown up and settled into a new normal, I had an unexpected encounter that reminded me why I'd made the right choices. I was at the grocery store, turning the corner near the produce section, when I spotted Victoria squinting at avocados like one of them had personally wronged her. She looked absolutely terrible. She was wearing baggy sweatpants and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked like she hadn't washed it in days. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she had the general appearance of someone whose life wasn't going according to plan. And of course, there was the baby bump that she couldn't manipulate or guilt her way out of, visible proof of the choices she'd made. When she spotted me, her entire face lit up like I was some kind of long-lost savior who had appeared to rescue her from her problems. "Marcus!" she said, all breathless and desperate, like she'd been waiting months for this exact moment. I didn't even slow down my pace through the store. I had no interest in engaging with her or getting drawn back into her drama. "I've been trying to reach you," she blurted out, actually grabbing my arm to stop me from walking away. "I've been calling and texting, but you blocked me everywhere. I really need to talk to you." "I blocked you for a very good reason," I replied calmly, pulling my arm free from her grip. "That should have been the end of our communication, but apparently you don't understand boundaries." But she launched into full desperation mode, the way people do when they realize they've burned all their bridges and have nowhere else to turn. She told me that Brandon had completely abandoned her, that she had no one left in her life, that she was sorry for everything that had happened, and that she still loved me. It was a pathetic display of manipulation that might have worked on the old me, but I could see right through it now. Then she tried to play her final card, the one she probably thought would reel me back in. "Maybe the baby is actually yours," she said with fake hope in her voice. "The timing could work out, and I know you always wanted to be a father someday." I actually laughed out loud at that desperate Hail Mary attempt. "You literally told me it wasn't mine," I reminded her. "You said those exact words to my face, and the timing makes it mathematically impossible, but nice try." Her eyes welled up with tears, like crying had ever solved any of her self-created problems. "It was a mistake," she whimpered. "The biggest mistake of my life, and I regret it every single day. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" I looked her straight in the eyes and delivered the cold, hard truth she needed to hear. "No, what you did wasn't a mistake. What you did was make a series of deliberate choices, one after another, that led to this outcome. You chose to betray me, you chose to lie to me, and you chose to blame me for your actions. Those weren't accidents or mistakes, they were decisions." Then I walked away from her and left my shopping cart behind. I couldn't finish grocery shopping next to the ghost of that much betrayal and manipulation. The whole encounter had left a bad taste in my mouth, and I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Later that same night, a new number started texting me relentlessly. It was Victoria again, having gotten a different phone to circumvent my blocks. But this time, her tone was completely different from the desperate pleading I'd encountered at the grocery store. These messages were filled with all-caps rage, blaming me for absolutely everything that had gone wrong in her life. She accused me of ruining her entire existence, claimed I had gotten Brandon fired from his job, said I had turned all our mutual friends against her, and painted me as the villain in her self-created tragedy. "You destroyed my life!" one message screamed. "I lost everything because of your vindictive revenge! You're a monster!" And you know what? She wasn't entirely wrong about what I'd done. I had systematically exposed both her and Brandon for who they really were. I had made sure their actions had real consequences. I had orchestrated their social exile and professional difficulties. And given the chance, I would absolutely do it all over again, probably twice as thoroughly and with even more devastating effectiveness. The last I heard through the grapevine, Brandon was completely unemployed and had been forced to move back in with his parents, living in their basement like some kind of middle-aged failure. His tech startup had let him go after his probation period ended poorly. His divorce had cost him most of his assets, and his reputation in our city was essentially destroyed. No respectable company wanted to hire someone with his track record of infidelity and workplace misconduct. As for Victoria, she had ended up moving back to her hometown several hours away, working behind the counter at a vape shop with a baby that Brandon refused to acknowledge or support financially. She was living in a small apartment above the shop, basically starting her life over from scratch at 26 years old with an infant and no real job skills or education to fall back on. They had both wrecked their own lives through their selfish choices, but but I had definitely made sure that the wreckage was public and permanent. I had ensured that their actions had lasting consequences that they couldn't just sweep under the rug or move on from easily. In my mind, they got exactly what they deserved for their betrayal. Now I live in genuine peace with Rex, who has turned out to be the most loyal and trustworthy companion I could have asked for. We've settled into a comfortable routine that brings me actual happiness and contentment. Every morning, we go for a long walk through the neighborhood while the air is still cool. Rex gets excited about everything: squirrels, other dogs, interesting smells, random strangers who want to pet him. His enthusiasm for simple pleasures is infectious and has taught me to appreciate small moments of joy that I used to take for granted. On weekends, we explore new hiking trails in the mountains surrounding our city. Rex is an excellent hiking companion. He never complains about the distance, never gets tired of beautiful scenery, and never tries to cut the adventure short to go back to air conditioning and comfort. We've discovered some absolutely stunning locations that I never would have visited when I was with Victoria, who preferred indoor activities and controlled environments. I've also started taking evening classes at the community college, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was working overtime to fund someone else's dreams. I'm studying business management with the long-term goal of maybe starting my own logistics consulting firm someday. It feels good to be investing in my own future rather than someone else's fantasy wedding. My apartment feels like home now in a way it never did when Victoria lived here. I've rearranged the furniture to suit my preferences, bought a huge, comfortable couch that Rex and I can both fit on, and set up a home office space where I can work on my business classes. There are no more decorative pillows that serve no functional purpose, no more scented candles that give me headaches, and no more constant background noise from someone else's TV shows. The silence that I was initially afraid of has become something I genuinely treasure. After years of constant drama, manipulation, and walking on eggshells around someone else's emotions, the peace and quiet of my own space feels like a luxury I didn't know I was missing. I've learned that vengeance doesn't always need to be dramatic or explosive like in the movies. Sometimes it looks like methodical exposure of the truth. Sometimes it looks like letting people face the natural consequences of their actions without interference or protection. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well and finding genuine happiness after someone tries to destroy your life. Rex has taught me that loyalty isn't complicated. It's simple, consistent, and reliable. He's never lied to me, never betrayed my trust, never pretended to be something he's not. When I come home from work, he's always genuinely excited to see me. When I'm having a bad day, he seems to sense it and stays close without being told. When I want to try something new or go somewhere different, he's always ready for the adventure. Turns out that revenge doesn't need fireworks or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it looks like silence, a top-tier HVAC system, and the unconditional love of a rescue dog who appreciates being chosen for a better life.